Hi folks, I'm continuing with my videos on Greek vases for the Greek theatre unit. Today we're going to have a look at the Cheiron bell crater, one of the weirder vases on the unit. So the Cheiron bell crater gets its name from a character who's labelled, I should say, on the vase. So in the centre we have Cheiron, and to the left we have the stock character Xanthias pushing him down the stairs. The reason Cheiron's name is comical here is because Cheiron is also the name of a centaur. I've given you a little clip art of a centaur there for reference, and we can see that that is being rationalised, that is being parodied by the man pushing our Cheiron up the stairs. So the person at the foot of the stairs is like the bottom or back end of the horse, whereas Cheiron, the character who's labelled, is stood up as the front end of the centaur. The label could apply to both of the men together, to be honest, because it is a rationalisation of a mythological creature. It's something that is mythological and serious, made very silly and mundane. And we know that comedy likes to make things that are elevated more mundane, more day to day, and more literal, really. You know, the idea of a man with four legs literalising things is another feature of comedy. So the vase is from the 4th century, 380 to 370 BC, and it does reflect a 4th century trend for mythological comedies, or comedies that maybe have a more mythological plotline or feature mythological references a bit more heavily. We can't be certain because we don't have the play for a frame of reference. The fragments and the titles that survive from the 4th century suggest that there was an increase in popularity in mythological comedy. This is because as theatre kind of spread its wings beyond Athens, things started to take on what we would call a pan-Hellenic appeal. That means rather than appealing to the Athenians in particular, the way that Aristophanes' Frogs does, they started to broaden to the Greeks more broadly. And they were things that everyone from different Greek states could enjoy because theatre was travelling. It wasn't just being performed in Athens. So it's a good insight into a broader culture of comedy, but it's not a great piece of evidence on Greek comedy in so much as we can't compare it to something that really survives. All of the evidence of that tradition is really fragmentary and quite tricky. Like, we wouldn't expect you to look on these fragments on this unit for A level. We just wouldn't. What is helpful about the vase is that it does show us quite a lot of stage machinery. So, for example, we see the stage building, we see the roof, we see some props behind. We see things that we're expecting to see in comedy, like the fat suit, the leather phallus, the short skirt that allows the leather phallus to peek out from underneath, and the exaggerated masks. Another theme we might see on this vase is the generation gap between Xanthias at the top and the two characters playing Cheiron at the bottom, who are older. We have one with black hair, two with white hair. Generational humour is something that we've seen in 5th century Greek comedy, okay? So in a play called Frogs by Aristophanes, Delacleon and Philocleon are a father and son duo, and they represent the views of their generation. So that kind of conflict is something that is more widely applicable than just Athenian, and again might point to this kind of pan-Hellenic appeal. If we have a think about these two kind of mysterious characters in the top right corner, on the British Museum website, they suggest that these figures might be the nymphs of Anigros, where Chiron bathed after being wounded by Heracles. So we've got a scene in scene, but again, they're in comic masks. They are not mythological or tragic characters who are being presented as outside of comedy. And it is perhaps a drawback of the vase that the artist has chosen to include a picture-in-picture, because it seems impossible for those characters to be in this scene on this stage. There's a bit of artistic license here to include them. On the far right, we're not sure who this character is. It's a young boy, either unmasked or in a tragic mask, given how small his head is, maybe unmasked. This could be a young Achilles, because traditionally that's Cheiron's tutee. But unlike Xanthias and Cheiron, he's not labelled, so we don't really know. But the appearance of characters who do not look to be in comic costume and comic mask is something we're going to see again on other 4th century vases. So this mixture of tragedy and comedy is quite different in the 4th century than it was in the 5th century. I've talked in the Birds Vase video about the way that Aristophanes would use tragic references, and he'd make fun of Procne and Philomela in Birds. I've talked about how Euripides' Telephus was mocked in Women at the Thesmophoria in our video on Thesmo. But in the 4th century, it seems to have gone a step further, and it seems to be the case that more of the plot and more of the characters are centred on a myth, and they're following that as a plot line altogether. But again, so much of the detail of this vase is unclear. So if we were to bring it all together then, the strengths and weaknesses, the things we could use for a 10 marker, well, fat suits, leather phalloy, comic costume, that's really recognisable and consistent with 5th century trends. It shows that the trends persisted. The naming of Xanthias as well, it reminds us that Xanthias is a stock character, he's a stock slave character. And we know that the slave in Aristophanes' Frogs is also called Xanthias. So we've got a repeated character even through the 4th century, which could add to the humour and the familiarity. The staging is really clear and explicit. We don't see this too often. We've got the steps, the raised stage here, and what seems to be a wooden stage. That can also indicate that theatre is being performed on the move, that these buildings might be temporary, they might be put up and taken down, and reinforces that idea of pan-Hellenic appeal that I've banged on about quite a bit already. We seem to possibly have a mythological comedy. Rationalising mythology, rationalising things that are supernatural is a 4th century trend. And we've got this picture in picture, which hints at Cheiron's story being part of the play, but also maybe undermines how useful this vase is because there's a bit of artistic license there. Overall, we don't have the contextual evidence to support what we learn from this vase. We'd have to compare it with other 4th century vases. And the big thing to say is we don't have the play, nor do we have plays of its kind surviving to us from the 4th century. Okay, I hope that was helpful for you. I understand that the 4th century vases are a bit more weird and wonderful, and they can be harder to answer a 10 marker on. I really encourage you to practice these because if they come up on the day, you do not want to be scrambling. Okay, I'll keep going to cover all the vases on the unit. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share to keep the channel going. Thanks.